Morning, Mr. March, back at your secret lair in front of a 105.
A 105, yes. Good morning, everyone, and nice to have you back here, Greg. Thank you. Yes, the 105, and what an amazing vehicle. This one in particular, because this one's got a different motor in it. Now, most of the 105s we found in South Africa came out with the standard 6-cylinder, non-turbo 1.8Z engine. Very good motor. Bulletproof, strong, a little bit slow at times when you're driving long hills, trying to overtake a truck. But this one's got the 24-valve 1HDFTE motor.
And in terms of the actual mechanics of the engine, what is the actual difference besides the turbo?
Well, the 24 valves makes a difference. I mean, you know, Toyota progressed from the 12-valve 1HDT motor to the 24-valve motor, which became a lot more efficient and, you know, just a little bit more power. Yeah, I wouldn't have all the specs exactly to compare right now, but certainly as they progressed with the motors, it certainly improved the power of the motor.
And economy as well.
Economy, yeah, you know, you can chip this, so a little bit more electronics involved, but power to weight, beautiful. I mean,
and if we talk the numbers, what are you able to give some of the numbers like of the standard, and then what you can get it if you chip it up?
Not on my head, so it's something we could actually look at, and it does improve it. You know, it's like adding a turbo to any motor. It's not ideal if you don't do it properly, and I think, you know, we do add turbos to the 6-cylinder 1.8Z motor. It's done very mindfully. Normally the motor is rebuilt, and it's a low pressure turbo, and it's set very conservatively because we want people to have that little bit extra power. But if I could get these motors or the 1HDT motor more frequently, I would drop those into most vehicles, because that extra power with the turbo from Toyota, designed by Toyota, is absolutely brilliant. So this is a lovely truck. It belongs to one of my clients who live in Australia. He's desperate to come out and use it, and he will very shortly. He owns a Troopy in Australia, so he loves that truck. He drives that extensively, and this truck for him is going to take him around Southern Africa. So, you know, the AT series has always been, as most people know, one of my very well favored vehicles, specifically because in England we were able to get the spec of a permanent four-wheel drive with front diff lock, center diff lock, rear diff lock, and a 1HDT turbo 12-valve motor. Brilliant. That's the one I own, and it's one I hold on to dearly. It's a great truck, you know. So, looking at this, the 105s are more freely available in South Africa. Not so much the diesels, you do get them, but the petrols too. This is diesel, obviously. And what have we done to this truck? Well, the motor got transplanted into the truck. It's got an upgraded radiator. It's got twin batteries, one for starting, one for auxiliary. Not always ideal to put an auxiliary battery under the bonnet. I do prefer them inside. But, you know, for what we were needing, for one fridge and not a big draw on the electrics, it's fine. It works. You know, it's about managing space, managing what clients need to do with the car. And the electrical system is always a big thing and a big discussion to understand what do you want to do with the car. And certainly if you're using any sort of newer battery technology like lithium batteries, you don't want them in the engine bay. You really want them, you know, in the car.
Because of the heat.
Heat, absolutely. We've got a compressor under the bonnet here. We've got an extra Raycore fuel filter, which I always put in. Second filter. And, you know, the Raycore or the Terrain Tamer do something similar. It's got a clear vision bowl. You can look underneath at the bottom of the filter. You can actually look in and you actually can see the fuel. And that's great, because if I have a problem with fuel, the first thing I want to do is open the bonnet, have a look, see, is the fuel looking clear? Is there any sort of discoloration, sediment, dirt, whatever? And that's going to tell me.
Do you ever recommend people to take a sample of the fuel before they put it in the car, just to have a look at it?
Yeah. So fuel's always a big topic, and I think once fuel's in the car, once it's in the tank, it's a big problem if it's not good. So, you know, your fuel, when you're traveling through places that are remote, I'll often stop and ask someone which is the best fuel station. There'll be 2 or 3 fuel stations in town, and one will probably be better at looking after their tanks. All the turnover of the fuel is much higher.
And you want to know when last the tank was there.
Well, when last the tanker,
tanker,
yeah, it's a
yeah.
good point, because, you know, if you pick up the dregs, and it's happening.
You don't want to be there half an hour after the tank
Yeah.
has filled it up, because then all the
It's all
sediment...
stirred up, yeah. So if you see a tanker and it's busy filling up at the tank at the garage,
Keep on
it's
driving.
best not to fill there, or at least wait a day or so if you can, you know. So again, before the fuel goes into the tank, how do you do that? I normally would supply something like a filter, like a funnel, which actually separates separates water and sediment. And Raycor do something like that. There are a few different manufacturers. It's a plastic funnel, and I've used that on many expeditions. Before the fuel goes into the tank, I'll do one of two things. I'll either take a glass bottle, get a sample of fuel, and let it stand just for a minute or so. And I'm looking at the fuel, and I'm looking to see if there's any separation. You know, can I see water sitting underneath the fuel? Because
So
the fuel's
water
will be at the bottom. Okay, and that's why you've got a water sedimenter, and you've got a drain at the bottom of the sedimenter, normally a little drain. And on most of the Toyota fuel filters, it's a fuel filter and a sedimenter, okay, water sedimenter, and a lot of them will put a light on the dash if there's a problem. You don't really want it to get to that point, because once the water's in the fuel filter, it's not great, because some of it may have got in through the injection pump and then into your engine. And water is, you know, it's corrosive, basically, and it's not going to do any good for any injection system or parts. So I want to prevent that. How do we prevent that? You could do a sample, as I said, with a bottle. Have a look. If it looks clear, if diesel is very dark, like almost like a Coca-Cola color, I've had that once, it's probably not been refined properly. Just don't put it in your tank, because it is not going to burn well in the motor. And the oil will get dirty very quickly, because it just becomes a lot of unburnt, unprocessed fuel, which goes through your engine, and actually the oil just becomes thick and sludgy and black very quickly. So when you know that the fuel is okay, the fuel station is high turnover, you've asked someone local, that's about as much as you can do.
Yeah.
And then if it's a really old Bowser that you look at, this garage has been in business 50 years, you don't know if they've changed their tanks, the pumps certainly look old, then put the funnel up and do that. You know, and try and make sure that you're absolutely getting the best fuel into your tank. And then you've got the extra fuel filter here. So I always put it before the factory filter, because I don't want to guess if there's a problem. I want to look in here, look at that little vision bowl, or the little bowl, clear bowl at the bottom of that filter, and to be able to tell me if that's possibly the problem. My car's not driving properly. Normally when something happens, you know, something goes wrong in a vehicle, there's an old saying that a lot of the doctors used to say: when you hear hoofbeats, don't think of horses. You know, people often go down the road and they think of zebras, and just think of the simple stuff. You know, something goes wrong. What have I just done? Have I just filled the car up with fuel? Well, then it's probably likely going to be the fuel. Okay, you drove into the fuel station, it was fine. You filled up, you've driven down the road, now the car's not going right, it's not pulling properly, there's a lot more smoke coming out, it just hasn't got the power. That's a sure telltale. I have had situations where people have gone and put petrol in the car and not diesel. So it's your responsibility to get out the car, especially when it's somewhere in a foreign country and you maybe don't know the guys. We take for granted when we give the guys our keys, they're going to put diesel in our
So
tank.
when you're filling up the car, you're always next to the
I get
tank.
out, absolutely. There's two things I want to do. I want to get out and check the pumps on zero. The old days you used to be able to, you know, they would run some fuel off and you'd be paying the extra fuel. So I want to
They'd
know the
pocket
pumps
the
on zero and they'd
150.
pocket the cash. Okay, that's clever, but doesn't help us. So that's the first thing. I want to make very sure that it's actually diesel. Now in certain countries, you know, in sort of the Arabic countries, it's not written diesel. And if you don't know, you need to make very, very sure. And one simple way is to get a bit of the fuel in your hands. And does it evaporate? Because if it evaporates, it's petrol and it's gone. Okay, and if it's diesel, it's going to be a bit oily. Make very, very sure that you don't go make that mistake. Because once that fuel's in your tank, it's not a good thing.
Absolutely. And another question was, say you buy one of these and the diesel's kaput, Well, I mean, the petrol could put. How difficult is it to change from a petrol to a diesel, putting an engine like this in?
On certain models, you can swap them over. You just need someone who knows what they're doing. You know, you're going to flush out systems. It depends on if it's a simple engine, then it's not so difficult. You know, if you're going to put a 1.8Z diesel into a petrol car, it doesn't take much to make that motor run. It becomes more complex when you're trying to marry up electronics on engines. That's when you have your challenge. You know, that's a specialist job when someone, you know, don't do it if, I'm very against doing transplants on cars that are not the same motor. So, you know, like putting a different brand in. It doesn't mean they don't work, and some people do great jobs of doing great conversions. But you need to know that that conversion, first of all, really works. When the guys used to put, I think it was a 5.7 litre V8 under some of the bonnets of Land Cruisers, the biggest challenge we had was trying to keep that engine cool.
And the gearboxes get ripped up.
Gearboxes get damaged. It's just, so, you know, once you're adding a complexity like that, you're going away from what we really stand for when it's going to take a car that's safe, reliable, and simple. You're adding another complexity you don't need. Now, putting this motor in, the 1HDFTE motor, in place of, let's say, the 1HZ, that's okay. That can be made to work.
A little low-range turbo on there.
You know, this is always the area where I say to people, if you're going to buy a vehicle that's had an aftermarket turbo fitted, I steer away from it.
Even if it's a Toyota turbo.
Well, if it's a Toyota turbo that's
Done
came from the
professionally.
factory, different story. If it's a Toyota turbo that someone's fitted to the 6-cylinder 1HZ diesel that wasn't designed to take a turbo, it has different
That's the
pistons.
thing, it was never designed for the turbo.
So when it's not designed for it, you're actually adding a complexity into that. You want the power at some compromise. So if you understand that you're taking a motor and you're adding a turbo, and you understand there's a compromise, and you're willing to work within that compromise. And what I mean by that is, you're going to take that motor, you're going to make sure that the motor is in very good condition. It doesn't help to take a motor with 200,000-300,000 kilometers on and put a turbo on. You know,
You just shorten the lifespan.
you're just shortening the life of it, and you can add a lot of stress to that motor. But if you took it and you rebuilt it and you ran it in for 5,000 Ks, and then you decided you wanted to put a turbo on it, that's fine. Make sure you run it within parameters that are safe. Fit an EGT gauge, an exhaust gas temperature gauge. That's going to be the most accurate way to monitor the heat in the engine, and drive it and set it to very safe parameters.